It's being recorded. So go ahead, Bob.
Thank you, Oliver. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, they can. They're all nodding.
Okay. Pretend I'm hitting a gavel. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Good evening. Welcome to our first online virtual meeting as a school board. At this point, we will start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Feel free to sit. A couple of announcements. I can see several board members, Mr. Gilbert, Mr. DeLallo, Mrs. Rajat, and Mrs. Hoffman. So we clearly have a quorum. Hopefully the other two will be able to join us, as well as several members from the district staff, and obviously Dr. Robinson on as well. What we'd like to do is simply start off with moving to the agenda, adopting the agenda. Allow Dr. Robinson to also update as needed and continue with the meeting. At the end of the meeting, I will also move towards sort of a session for public comment, allowing board members to comment and finish up as well. I think we're in an unusual circumstance, but obviously this is a meeting where we want to communicate, clear any resolution, any disresolution, anything that doesn't make sense, and continue to move forward as the district has over the last 2 weeks to ensure that we support this transition to online education. So can I have a motion from a board member? Feel free to raise your hand. Mr. Gilbert first.
Second.
Second from who?
Gary DeLallo.
Oh, second from Mr. DeLallo. All right. All in favor? I'm in favor. Mr. DeLallo's raising his hand. Mrs. Rajat and Mr. Miller?
Aye. This is Naomi.
Okay. Mrs. Hoffman says aye. Mrs. Rajat? If not, send a chat. I do see a chat open. And we have at least 4.
So we have all members on board. Mrs. Stevenson is on a phone call.
Okay.
Yeah, I got to figure out what's going on with my Google, but I can hear you.
So Go ahead, Bob.
So I'm going to consider this an approved action. We have 4, 3 others we can catch up later if they want to submit an email or text, but I'm assuming that this is an approved agenda. And at this point, we'll turn over to Dr. Robinson to continue with the meeting.
Sure. So I'm going to switch to presentation mode and go to the board agenda. So 1 second.
There it is.
So at this point, you should be seeing the board agenda on your screen. And on the board agenda, I'm going to focus on the budget piece of it. Then I'll do the comments afterwards because I want to just get out of this mode after this. The budget doc you should also see on your screen in a second here. And again, I'm going to ask people if they can mute. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to quickly walk through the first several slides and go down to some of the changes since we had some conversations with the board. In a second, this presentation is going to load. So at this point, you should be seeing the board presentation. The first couple slides, the board is very familiar with, so I'm just going to quickly scroll through those slides. The new information that you see here, mandated contractual cost. As you see on this slide, we have some indication of what some of those costs will be for us. Health insurance right now, we're looking at about an overall 2% between health and drug increase. We're anticipating expending next year about $26 million. Pension costs, as you see, the adjustments in rate increases for TRS and ERS, respectively, both of those will be about $11 million. $11.4 million for the coming year expenditure. Collective bargaining, we are in the process of negotiating with CSEA. And again, looking at that group, 687 members, and that payroll figure is about $26 million. So a couple of things that we've been trying to focus on in terms of instructional investments. And again, I'll summarize some things at the end after I get out of presentation mode. We're looking at potential addition of some staff, not a lot, 1.6 in ENL, 0.2 in accelerated math. Special education, we're still waiting for some IEP resolution, so we may have to make some adjustments in special education. That's to be seen based upon CSE meetings that are taking place right now. At the elementary level, based upon enrollment, we could potentially see some reduction in elementary staff. And again, trying to address the new courses that the board has approved, the financial literacy course and the health career course, looking at a total about 0.9 FTE for those two courses. Alternative schedule, we're looking at intense focus on professional development. So that's what the allocation is for what we're anticipating for the summer going into next school year. Mental health, allocation to focus on some professional development and turnkey training, particularly around restorative justice. So that's what that allocation is for. Curricular enhancements, recognizing that we continue doing some shifts as the new gen standards come in, trying to address science and social studies with some PD, and continuing our progression of the science kits from last year that we started. And technology, again, and today in this time is a perfect example of trying to equip all teachers with technology. And today is a perfect example of what we're trying to do right now in terms of capacity for people to do more online work. Tuitions, just ongoing tuitions that we have between CTE programs and Tech Valley High School programs related to BOCES costs. Just want to highlight some of those things real quick. And there's some repurposing opportunities that we're looking at, and some minor adjustments and some coaching stipends and some additional supports for athletics. So in the last part of the operational upgrades, we've been talking for a while about the profile of an engaged classroom, and you see the allocation there. Quite frankly with you, that's a drop in the bucket in terms of needs, but we're trying to be very strategic in terms of where we start to furnish some innovative, provide some innovative furnishing, as well as some facelifts, particularly at high school. We have some high school rooms that are, quite frank with you, not the most inviting and engaging places for kids. So we're trying to start some of those more significant places first. Safety is always an ongoing piece for us. We're looking to upgrade our capacity to communicate with parents via text. So that's something that we're going to look into pretty aggressively in the spring, summer for the coming school year. After hours building security is one of those things that, particularly again at the high school, where after 4 o'clock, it's a whole different world with many people coming into the buildings for after hour activities. And that's also the time that we have the least amount of folks on hand. So we want to try to beef that up a little bit more as well. Operations side of it, again, we continue to focus on PD for operation personnel. That has paid tremendous dividends, and we're seeing it right now, quite frank with you, as we have people trained up to do the type of disinfectant work that we're doing right now. We didn't plan to exercise that right now, but it's so great that we have that capacity right now to do that, for a prime example. Inventory control is one of those things that we have to always beef up to ensure that when we expend a lot of money on supplies and materials, we're able to track where it is as we move forward. IMS is always one of those pieces that we're looking at. Again, the contractual related type things related to that. Not a lot of increase, but some adjustments taking place there. We continue to have a lot of increase in safety meetings and OT for summer work, some of those other things that Al has really focused on professionalizing transportation. And so certainly want to continue that investment. A big piece that we're trying to do that we're starting HR and the business office is some electronic personnel files or paperless forms as much as possible, to start transitioning a lot of the things that we do manually now to becoming a much more electronic based piece of it. On the other side of the coin is how do we leverage some resources to, quite frankly, pay for some of these kind of things. So right now we have 15 retirees slated to go on the board agenda in April and have those folks recognized. And based upon that, we're looking to repurpose about 625,000 of it that hopefully will offset a lot of the things that I just mentioned to you before in terms of new investments. So when you look at the totality of this, for example, look at the instructional salaries projected for 2021 to be about 65 million, administrative salary about 5.9, non-instructional salary is about 30. So when you kind of think about it, the bulk of the budget is in fact in salaries and benefits that we pay for our employees, and this gives you a good perspective in terms of where the dollars are going, with a significant portion of it going towards instructional salaries, which it should be because that's our primary business. Equipment, we continue to try to make sure that we're evolving and changing out equipment and trying to be on the cutting edge with some things. But the equipment budget, as you see, is actually a slight reduction from last year. And again, we're trying to see where we can make some strategic shifts. And that's one area that we're making a slight reduction down in equipment. Contractual, the most of the contractual adjustments you see there related to some adjustments with some of the professional development initiatives that we have been focused on. But again, not a significant amount, but a lot of that related to those type things as we move forward. We will continue to maximize textbook and library aid, and that number is very consistent because our formula is consistent from year to year. Some slight adjustments in BOCES services, but as you see, it's relatively flat in terms of what we call the operational costs. Those are some of the natural increases or decreases, and then the strategic pieces are some decisions that we're making to either add or cut some things based upon decisions moving forward. So again, BOCES costs are relatively flat, or we anticipate to be relatively flat. Supplies, supplies is pretty, one of the things, again, relatively flat, going from 3.8 to 3.9 in supplies, and a lot of that is trying to focus on some additional miscellaneous things. So no one specific thing that's driving the cost. It's a combination of things that's driving supply adjustments. And benefits, as you see here, benefits costs. Most of the benefit costs fall in the operational side. That's everything from our health benefits to our retirement benefits to Social Security. All those things are part of that benefits line. So the $1.4 million is basically the cost of doing the business that we're doing right now. No strategic adjustment proposed for the benefit piece of it. So that's the benefit piece that you see there. A point of note on the transfer for other funds, $494,000 reduction because, again, retiring debt, and we've been talking about that, how our debt service is reducing over the years, and so that's what that represents, that reduction of $494,000. So our debt line, in essence, next year will be lower than the debt line moving forward. So when you look at this piece of it, we're looking at a proposed budget that's about 177 this year to about 182 moving forward. Again, I just want to walk through the presentation. I'm going to get out this mode, and then we can ask some specific questions that you may have. So when you look at this kind of summarizes our projected expenditures a little bit. We're looking at prior year's budget, 1920, of 177.7, operational additions. In other words, this is where if we just keep doing the things that we're doing, it's going to be about 2.6%. The strategic adjustments, not a lot, is about 0.6, and so that's where we start looking at the differences in terms of what we can add, what we can cut moving forward. So we're looking at a proposed budget that's right around, at this point, 2.69%. Put that in context for the board. The tax cap right now calculates to be 3.0%. That would generate about $3.8 million more in tax levy. So in other words, a total tax levy of $128.8 million. That's if we go with what the tax cap calculation translates to be. When we look at revenues from the budget perspective, in other words, if we look at a budget increase of 2.69% and use that for our baseline, for expenditure baseline, the tax impact, again, assuming very minimal or no increase in foundation aid, will be about a tax level of about 2.98%. So again, comparison of the 2.98% tax levy generated by a budget increase of 2.69 in comparison to the tax cap of 3.04. You see that delta, the difference is about $73,000. So essentially, where we are is very comparable to what the tax cap limit would generate. So give the board a comparison point. Just a couple more slides and I'll transition out so we can have a conversation. When you look on the revenue, right now, if we look at the tax cap from a tax cap perspective, tax cap driven revenue is $3.8 million. Expense driven revenue is about $3.7 million. That delta, as I said before, about $74 million, call it that. And so kind of keep board perspective. If we, a 0.5% in tax levy is about $643,000. 1% in tax levy is about $1.2 million. So in other words, I'm just going to go back for a second. If the board were to say, hey, you know, Oliver, if we're at 2.69 and we were to drop that to 1.69, what's the difference? Well, the difference is we'll have to reduce by about $1.2 million. So that's what that translates to. On the other side of it, if the state were to say, hey, we give the district receive an additional $650,000, what's the impact on the tax levy? It would reduce the tax levy by about 0.5%. So that's how that translates. And I gave you both sides in terms of if we had to make reductions, what's that impact? Or if we get additional aid, how much would that reduce the tax levy as we move forward? So I'm going to shift back for a second, stop sharing, and go back to the mode where we could have a brief conversation.
Hey, Oliver, so real quick.
One second, Todd. Let me just transition for a second. I'm not sure why that this didn't.
You're back.
But all I'm seeing on my screen is.
Oh, check. And Google Meet tab at top.
Okay, so Todd, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So given the current state of the environment, knowing that things are going to be tougher, knowing that there's potentially a lot of financial impact on this area, depending on how long things stay closed, the tax certiorari fund is what we hold for unpaid taxes. Is that right? Or what are we doing to proactively prepare for businesses going out of business, that type of thing, if anything?
So very good question, Todd. And we have been considering a lot of things. In the same way that we're trying to think about how we're going to provide education, we're going to think about the model of how schools are financed. So the answer to your question is, yes, we have some capacity in the tax certiorari based upon largely the cases that we know of now. If we have a significant economic downturn, I do anticipate that's going to be a huge issue and something that everyone will be wrestling with. And so I'm not sure. So it's a flip side, two sides. In order to get increase in reserves, we need to get more from the tax base. And if the tax base is going down, we can't increase the reserve. So it becomes one of those catch-22 type scenario. I think that as a school district, we are certainly better than most in terms of our capacity to deal with some of those type of things. Secondly, tax certiorari cases often have to go through a long process, court process, if you will, in terms of how we look at financing. But that's definitely one of those legitimate things that we have to take in mind as we move forward. Another question, board mate. Again, if you have a question, just unmute, ask your question, and then mute, and I'll try to address your question.
So along the same lines, is there any plans to change what's put into the reserves with this budget?
So I'm assuming, Naomi, you're talking the same tax reserve. So the tax certiorari, we only tap into if we have tax certiorari claims. One of the difference, what we do when we talk about reserves, the fund balance side of the revenue side is where we use the fund balance contribution to try to mitigate some of the tax levy impact. We have thought about that, but at this point, we haven't looked at it closely yet. And the reason why, we're watching to see how this whole situation is going to, in fact, unfold. One of the things that we're going to caution against is trying to use all your eggs one day and don't have anything for the future. And so we have to have many different strategic ways of looking at it. How do we mitigate some of our expenditures, as well as how do we potentially infuse some revenue and not having a situation that we infuse so much revenue one year that we can't sustain that revenue infusion the next year. Similarly, we don't want to have a situation that we're making so many reductions one year that we can't bring those things back the following year. So that's that delicate balance that we'll watch over the course of the next several weeks here in terms of where the budget process is going to unfold from the state level and how that's going to play out for us as a school district as well. So more to come on that as we move forward.
Thank you.
Another question, anyone?
Hey, Oliver, it's Bob. Question on the after-hour security. How do you envision that working? Is that going to be an SRO resource, or would that be a non-SRO?
No, that will be one of our campus security. Right now, we'll probably add some additional capacity through our campus security. Largely, it's when you think about the high school. We have monitors at the high school that remain there until about 4:30, 4:45, or something in that ballpark. And then after that, the front entrance is pretty much unmonitored. And there isn't a single day that there isn't something happening in the high school. And so what we want to do is pretty much have someone that's stationed, if you will, at the high school to meet and greet people, and to be an eye open in terms of access. And particularly as we look to restructure the front entrance of the high school, we may very well be able to keep doors locked and having someone there for a longer period of time to buzz people into the building in a much more controlled manner. So that's the plan at that point in terms of how we're going to use the additional capacity at the high school.
Thank you.
Mrs. Stevenson asked a question in chat that I wasn't sure exactly when she said, how did the waiver work? Will it save us how much, and is what the only term? So if Mrs. Stevenson, you could clarify what you mean, which waiver are you referring to? I'm not sure if I lost Deanna or not. I could circle back with that question at some other point. Any other questions with the board? Mr. DeLallo, you had sent me an email earlier. Do you want to articulate that question to the group and I'll try to address it as well?
Okay, I'll certainly try. In light of a likely recession, the state's capacity to bring in sufficient funds to support its own budget will be adversely affected, even beyond the $6 billion shortfall they're already projecting. Also, because of the needs for medical emergency allocations, which will probably take a priority, it may divert funds that otherwise would have been available to education. So the question basically is, what do we do in terms of going forward with our budget in a extremely unpredictable environment? So
great question, Gary, and one that I know I've been contemplating personally, and one that Kathy and I discussed in terms of trying to identify, if you will, if we have to make some key, I'm going to call it key and careful reductions, how and where will those reductions occur? Again, if we find ourselves in these, what we have right now, these very uncharted waters, and we're faced with a serious economic issue right now, a lot of people are saying a recession type situation. We have a lot of issues we're dealing with at that point. So I say that because those will be some pretty extensive and deep conversations that we need to have, not only with the board, but certainly at that point, we need to assess the economic impact on the community. So while we don't have a specific answer, that's clearly one of those things that's squarely on the whiteboard, so to speak, for consideration in terms of if we have to make some strategic adjustments, how do we make those adjustments without, quite frankly, to eroding the quality of education for kids. And so that's always the juxtaposition between being penny wise and pound foolish in our deliberations and our actions. And so great question, Gary. It's a question that we're all watching to see. Clearly, the state budget is going to be significantly impacted by what's going on right now. The good or bad thing is that market downturns typically have a year lag, but that's not the big issue we have. The big issue is local economic downturns in terms of if people don't have jobs, and then the ability to pay becomes a big issue at the local level in terms of taxes and things of that nature. So that's definitely one of the consideration that we have to watch and see how this whole thing is going to unfold in the next several weeks here.
Dr. Robinson, it's Christina. The question, just to piggyback on that, is the sense that with, healthcare, especially with the burden or overburden of the healthcare system. Right now, we're saying for our healthcare, for our staff, for our employees, it looks like it's flat, for an increase for this year. But could that also be something that's uncertain and change, that we might have skyrocketing healthcare costs as well, as being compounded in the impact of the COVID-19 issues?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's on mute. Oh, good. So absolutely, that's a real issue. And obviously it's an issue that no one has an answer for. However, I think the good thing that we're in a place where we're not sitting here talking about projecting a 10% increase and then going beyond 10%. We're pretty flat, and so any adjustments we hope will be adjustments that will be manageable from a budget standpoint. But great point, Christina, because when you think about, we expend about $26 million in healthcare costs, pretty significant dollar amount. And consequently, then we have to think about what does that translate to. But more importantly, the cost is critical. It's even what's going to be the provision of healthcare. What would that look like if what people are predicting the potential impact of a pandemic would be? So, but absolutely, it's one of those things that I guess, we're fortunate because we've been so diligent in the past that we are in a place that I'm hoping that, and again, that at worst it's weathering a storm and not getting caught in a tsunami.
Thank you.
Mrs. Stevenson, you had a question. Can you articulate your question for me again?
If I could add, because I did see Deanna's comment, and it was about the timeline. And I am curious too, if what is happening right now, if we have any flexibility with the budget that's being proposed in the approval process. Deanna, so if that's Deanna's question, that's how I perceived it, and I think it's a good one. I mean, it's something that we do need to know.
Yes, a great question, and I'm kind of smiling. I was on a conference call this morning with the Capital Region BOCES superintendents, and we have been very coordinated, the 24 component schools within this region, on everything we're trying to do. And we also know we have the benefit of being in the capital region and be able to leverage influence by the power of presence or proximity to the state capital. One of the things, and I opened my mouth, and unfortunately everybody say, hey, Oliver, you should do it. One of the things I proposed to the group today that we need to start considering is the fact that right now it would be hard pressed that if we're closed school into April and beyond to then hold a budget vote. That's something that I don't see as a feasibility. So what we're doing, instead of simply saying to the legislature, hey, we're going to have a problem, we're going to say to the legislature, we know what the problem is, and here's a potential solution. So without having all the details at this point, I'm just going to share the concept of what we're looking to do is to hopefully propose language to the governor, to the legislature, that essentially says that school districts, if they stay within the calculated cap boards of education, similar to the same authority, ironically, that municipalities have right now to authorize budget without a public referendum. For places whose caps are less than the budget that they proposed last year, as a safe harmless, so to speak, if their budget is below or at the same level as the budget they proposed last year, assuming the budget they proposed last year, meaning 1920 that we're living in, was within the cap, people will be held safe harmless. So I share that with the board because that's pretty much draft in my head. We have 3 people that we're working on it right now, and we're trying to propose some language to the legislature so we won't find ourselves in May scrambling, and worse yet, someone in May overnight coming up with some asinine piece of legislation that we can't live with. But I can't see how we're going to have the traditional budget vote if in fact schools are closed going into April in that sequence. The second part related to that is also related to Board of Education members and votes, because those the 2 things come hand in hand. So we also have some folks right now talking and communicating with NISBA to get it on their radar screen, and I'm sure they already have it on their radar screen, but to again try to have a consistent and much more collaborative approach to these things, and not having one agency saying one thing, another agency doing another thing, and all of a sudden the legislature get confused and do something in the middle that no one likes or wants. So those things are clearly on the radar screen, and I would say in the next several months, next several weeks, we'll bring those things up. However, right now, the priority for most schools, the state, is to try to figure out how we deal with the containment efforts. And so while that's important, we cannot allow the budget issues to fall on the back burner. Similarly, even the state budget, there's a concern that the state budget should be in place in the next week or so in order to have an on-time budget April 1st. Right now, the legislature is out of session. They're supposed to come back next Wednesday. I'm assuming that they'll still be coming back to start looking at the budget. And so the concern is, if they come back, what would they actually look at? Would they look at real proposal, or would they try to essentially say, take what the governor proposed in his budget? Because both the Senate and Assembly were poised to add additional revenues to the budget that would have provided additional revenues to education. However, considering the current circumstances, I'm not sure if that's a feasibility or possibility. Part of the good thing for us, and I say good thing, if that happens, still not a great thing for us as a school district. The good thing for us is that our budget that we just proposed to you right now, or projected to you right now, is based upon very minimal increase in additional state aid. So in other words, we didn't go into this building a budget banking on or hoping for additional revenues. So those are some of the factors that are out there right now. The waiver of the 180 school day piece was an important piece from the governor, because that was to avoid the state taking away money from school districts for not satisfying the 180-day piece of it. So a preventive measure that we needed to have. And I know that sometimes the public didn't appreciate when we mentioned the fact that we need to have these waivers in place, because I, as superintendent, can't say to the board, a board that's trying to be fiscal responsible, yes, we want to lobby and advocate for funding, while on the other side, I'm allowing funding to go out the back door. So that's the trick in this whole situation. How do we preserve what we have from a funding perspective? How do we preserve what we have from a program perspective, recognizing that we may not have a lot of funding coming in, or even the potential of reduction of funding coming in? And that's going to be the tricky spot for us as we move forward. Other questions, comments?
Hey, Oliver, Deanna was trying to ask a question, but she can't unmute herself. Can you unmute her?
Let me 1 second. I don't know why Deanna can't unmute, and I'm trying to unmute her and I can't unmute her neither.
She put her questions into the chat area.
I saw her question. That's why I was trying to address that in a broader thing. So there's a timetable of the budget vote. I was trying to address that, the last comment here. so I'm not sure if I addressed your question comprehensive, Deanna. If you don't mind, just come back to the chat and address that for me. Well, Deanna, just add comments to the chat and I'll try to address it. Any other question that we have on the board? Yeah, she said I did, that's fine. And we can certainly follow up beyond this point as well. Any other questions that people have? Yes, no more questions?
Hey, Oliver, this is Bob. I sort of have a contextual question. So we have a lot of unknowns happening the next few weeks and months in terms of how the state will react to what it doesn't know. But I think people will ask me, what are we trying to do in this meeting? And really, we're trying to present our blueprint for next year's educational structure at Shen based on what we've done in the past. And we really need that blueprint out there. I think every district needs to say, this is what, with all the puts and takes, all the staff planning and all the things we've done now, this is what it looks like. So then we can explain that we don't want this taken away across the board. Is that a fair way to put this in context?
It's a fair way, Bob. And I think the big piece is going to be a timing piece of when we start having public conversations about budget. And I say that because right now, this is not the time, because there's so much concern about the health issues, so much concerns about the economic stability issues. Say, for instance, as a school district, we have made for the time being a commitment to not create a situation where people are losing jobs or not getting paid, because we know that the economic impact of that is pretty significant. But yes, at some point, and I think that point might be hopefully early April, mid-April, to start providing that broader context in terms of the value add of a quality educational experience, not only to our students, but also to our community. Because we certainly know that this community is what this community is, largely because of the quality of schools. And I think that needs to be a constant that's out there in the mind's eye of our public and our taxpayers.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Because one of the things I also want to spend a few minutes just to walk through the bus proposal. This is time of year as well that Mr. Karam shared some of our bus replacement pieces, and I just want to spend a couple minutes on that as well. But I don't want to transition off that until some of the questions that the board has at this point can be addressed.
This is Naomi. I have a question. As we have a budget roadshow, and as far as disseminating this information out, what is the plan as far as the community is concerned? In addition to mailings, is what I'm thinking.
So right now, again, time schedule wise, we're very much at from a outward presentation of the budget. This is our first step. So this is our first budget meeting publicly, so to speak. We have the board meeting next week, and then we have another budget meeting after that, and an adoption piece by the board. So however, I would venture to say that if we're in the same situation early April, mid-April, our budget roadshow process will change significantly. We will be going towards more WebEx type information, more Google Hangouts type information. So we'll be putting out links to say to folks, hey, we'll be on at this time, similar to now, where we'll walk through a presentation and allow for some Q&A, be it through chat or otherwise, just to get information out there. So we'll certainly use technology. And ironically, quite frank with you, that model may even continue beyond a crisis situation where we could use technology more readily to do some of the things that we do now. That's not to say that we would not continue as much as the situation allows us to have the face-to-face meetings such as town hall, town board meetings, some of those kind of things, but certainly trying to use technology a little bit different, using videos, putting videos out, and having the videos available for people to view and look at. So we have given some consideration to those things. And so those are the changes that I think will be, necessary as a result of the current situation we're dealing with.
Dr. Robinson, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Stevens, you're welcome.
Well, there you go. There's this bright spot for the day. Deanna learned how to unmute herself. There you go. All right. No, you answered it. I did want to understand the waiver a little bit more and how far does that go? But I think you did answer that. So that was the only other thing. And thanks for the timetable answer.
Yeah, not a problem. And again, I just want to emphasize the waiver piece because it's one of those things that other than Kathy, myself, and then one other person in the business office that actually submits state aid information, no one has any idea. We talk about all the time that kids are supposed, the state requires 180 days. And people know that, people repeat that, but people don't realize the implication of that. That's truly a state aid formula issue. And that's the reason why we try to be sticklers about snow days and all those other things. And so that waiver is critical and with that piece of it. And so we were trying to, even before the governor's declaration of closure for the 2 weeks and our closure last week, the first declaration from the governor was that if we did the closure in conjunction with the Department of Health, which while the Saratoga County Health Department didn't say Shen has to do X, Y, and Z because you had a case, we were in consultation with them all along. And so we knew that we were on fairly decent footing for our first closure. And now this recent declaration for the governor solidifies that we did. And I'm hoping that it doesn't occur again, another closure or an extension of the closure. But certainly that piece preserve us not having a situation where the state is saying we're going to deduct aid because we didn't satisfy the 180-day requirements. And that could be translate to be millions of dollars for us as a system based upon the number of days. And so we certainly didn't want to put ourselves in that predicament. And it wasn't about trying to save money and sacrifice in health, because we were doing all the health pieces regardless, but we were trying to make sure we're strategic on the other side to preserve our state aid capacity. So that was a great question, Deanna, because that ties into the budget thing as we move forward as well.
I just have one question about the presentation itself. In the agenda that was sent out and also the one that's on the website, the link isn't live. Can you send us this presentation?
So you didn't see the budget presentation?
I saw what you shared as we were walking through it.
Okay, so I'll go back and check to make sure while you're not seeing that link, but I'll double check to make sure that the board that we'll do that. I'll go back tomorrow and relink it, or quite frankly, which I may just send the link directly in an email to board members. So you'll have that. You'll have that tonight. I'll do that before going home tonight.
Thank you.
So I think Ken just pointed something out to me, and I know what happened. Mrs. Ford, she created two separate lines, and I think she linked one and then linked the other. So I'll go back and relink both of them. But regardless, I'll send out the budget presentation link to the board some point tonight. So, Mr. Presser, if you don't mind, I would just want to transition to the bus replacement real quick, so you could so we could talk about that and then wrap up with some additional comments.
Sounds good.
I'm going to shift again to present mode so everyone can see the same thing. So again, you should see on your screen the board agenda. And on that, I'm going to open the bus replacement presentation. So I'm just going to walk through this very briefly. Again, Mr. Karam is also on the line, and I told Mr. Karam that for tonight, I'll just walk through the highlights of it, and he's available if there are specific questions that the board may have to address those questions after I walk through the presentation. So I'm just shifting the presentation mode. As you should use right now, you should be seeing on your screen bus replacement recommendations as we move forward. A lot of the similar things in terms of the criteria that's been used very consistent criteria that's used to determine replacement, age, mileage, cost, reliability, repair costs. All those type things are the same factors that we use year after year, again, to make sure that we have a consistent process that lends to a consistent outcome. Just some of the things that we're looking at now, so here's a new age. Now we're looking at buses with buying buses with safety detectors on it, buses with Wi-Fi capacity potentially, and this is a perfect example of as we look into the capacity that people may have in communities, can we use our buses to be Wi-Fi hotspots? And so it's a whole different conversation that we're talking about. Buses, it's no longer your mom and pop buses anymore. It's buses being used in different ways. And so those are some of the type things that we're looking at in terms of why we're replacing buses. Some of it is to bring some new technology in place. A lot of it is to make sure that we have a safe system of transporting our students. One of the things that we're looking at right now and is looking at as a cost of fuel changes, looking at more gasoline powered buses versus diesel powered buses. And a lot of that, some of that is the complication that comes with some of the diesel engine. And so that's a big piece that is concern for us. We're looking at the cost of the repair for some of the diesel buses versus cost of the repair for gasoline buses. We're looking at warm up in the winter time. And how long does it take the buses to warm up? And so not only from a standpoint of bus warm up, but it's also a labor cost in terms of how long people have to be here for buses to warm up and idle to be ready to go. So these are all the factors that when we start thinking about shifting, in this case, the type of buses that we look to purchase moving forward. And so we've been looking at this pretty closely, that transition piece between diesel buses and gas-powered buses. Again, Mr. Karam could go into that if there are questions related to that after the presentation. This chart is a great pros and cons in terms of diesel versus gas. And so for those board members who have a keen interest in this, I would ask you to look at this chart closely, and not only tonight, but at some point in the future you have more questions, please feel free to send those questions to me. I'll vet those questions through Mr. Karam and provide comprehensive response back to board members. But this chart gives you a good sense of, as we're looking at, again, there are pros and cons to both of them. And the piece of it is which are the cons that are from an operational piece, or should I say efficiency piece, and also which are the cons from a cost effectiveness piece. And so we're looking at those things very closely as we try to figure out where's our fleet and the type of buses that we purchase moving forward. Just give you some timeline again in terms of the cost of different types of buses over the course of time. So it's a efficiency piece as well as an economic piece that we're trying to assess moving forward. So the replacement piece, in the past, we've always fluctuated between 19 and 21 vehicles. And right now we're on point for those 21 vehicles, recognizing that we do have replacement of a grounds and maintenance vehicle in here. And that's something that we need. We need a much more all-purpose vehicle for some of the things that we need from the grounds maintenance. So you see that's included in this referendum piece as well. So we're looking at about 21 vehicles, costs not to exceed $2.2 million. Looking to auction off as much as we can to recoup some savings from some of the old buses. Reassigned buses. We have a lot of buses that now have been reassigned for IMS purposes, for maintenance purposes, certainly trying to maximize those buses that doesn't reach the standard for pupil transportation, but certainly use the standards for operational purposes. So this just give you a flavor of the buses that we're looking to purchase. Looking to purchase some large buses. We're looking to purchase some mid-sized buses. And then you see the grounds, which is a multi-use truck, where right now, in many instances, when we have work to do, either we're renting items, or quite frankly, you're having 2 or 3 people doing something that one person can do if we had the right equipment. So as we think about these things, we're not only thinking about how much things cost, we're also thinking about what's the labor implication for having better equipment, or quite frankly, the more appropriate equipment as we move forward. So that's where we are looking from a bus perspective for the bus referendum. So I'm going to shift out of this and go back to the question mode again, similar to what we just did before. So questions.
Yeah, this is Christina. Just a question out of curiosity. There seems to be a lot of pros to go from diesel to regular fueled buses. Are there also any incentives, financial incentives to do that because it is better for the environment? Like I was wondering if there's any grants or any other kinds of funding that would be out there, for switching over as well.
Right now, most of the funding is trying to go to electric vehicles, which we simply don't have the capacity. Or I say the capacity that exists for buses to do it effectively. We looked at that. We looked at some electric buses a year or so ago. We had one that we drove around for a while to see how effective it was, but the technology just simply hasn't caught up with that yet. I don't know, Mr. Karam, if you want to contribute to that question at all.
Sure. So you're right. There is no grants for gasoline-powered school buses, and you're spot on with the electric buses. They're just prohibitively too expensive, over 330 some odd thousand per bus. While there is some grant monies for that, you're looking at also having to build infrastructures for plugins. And that's a huge commitment. And at this point, I would not make a recommendation to go in that direction, not unless you're willing to flip the entire fleet and for the foreseeable future, put up the high cost for each bus.
Thanks, Al. Yeah, and actually, I wasn't encouraging going electric because there are so many issues with that too, as you mentioned. I was just curious from going from diesel just to regular gasoline, but no, I appreciate that we look at every aspect. So thank you.
No, great question. Thank you, Christina. Other questions from board members, please. So here no question. I'm assuming that the presentation is clear. I'm surprised Mr. Delato doesn't ask his traditional question of, are we doing enough?
No, I don't have that particular question. I actually do have a question that relates to transportation, but not purchase.
Sure.
I know that a lot of our bus drivers are otherwise retired, and probably demographically, we have an older population driving buses than in the classroom. This is also a more vulnerable population as far as the spread of the virus. Do we anticipate any problem with retaining our labor force as a consequence of there being a little bit leery?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. In fact, I think we already had one situation where a driver who said, I don't want to pick up kids from that school because we had a faculty member confirmed. And so I say, Gary, that's there. And be honest with you, this depends on the magnitude of the situation. We may see a lot of those type comments. The one thing, though, again, kudos to Mr. Karam and his leadership. And there's a great video clip that's out there, and if the board hasn't seen the video yet, last weekend, I think maybe 12, 14, 15 hours were expended by transportation staff to thoroughly disinfect all the buses. And so that's done for twofold. One, we needed to do it. Two, we also want to send a clear message to transportation personnel as well as to our parents that when we say that we are trying to do all we can out of an abundance of caution, we're trying to do all we can out of abundance of caution. So, but your comment, Mr. Delalo, is very much one that's on point in terms of the age of our drivers, which we do have some drivers that are in that age range that the CDC is saying that could be more vulnerable to the COVID-19 virus than not. And so that's one of those things that we have to keep in mind, especially since we already have a shortage of drivers. And so Mr. Karam has been very diligent about effectively communicating with transportation staff to keep people encouraged, to keep people informed, to facilitate and address questions that we have. And we hope that right now, the situation we have where it's people are kind of in that wait and see mode, that that it stays that way until we have a situation that we have to significantly transport kids again. I think to date, we only transport them to one school, and I think after today, that may not be the case again after tomorrow in transporting to any school because of the declared closure by the governor.
That's correct, Dr. Robinson. Today was the last day. As of tomorrow, no students are being transported. We're just supporting the meal delivery.
Any other question related to the bus proposal that we try to address with the board?
Not for that, but to say thank you for what you're doing as far as getting the meals to these kids. I think that's really important.
Our pleasure.
Yep. Mr. Presley, any other questions related to the budget or the buses that you want me to address?
I don't have any. Anybody from the board with another question? Going once? If not, please continue with the meeting, Dr. Robinson.
So just again, just to comment, to kind of summarize some things. This is what we're saying, our first presentation to the board. We will continue to monitor things very closely as we move forward. There's a lot of unknowns, as you know, and similar to how we're dealing with the communication that went out today to the board, as information come to us and things develop, we'll certainly make all attempts to keep the board as updated as quickly as we can, recognizing that sometimes things come and we have to respond accordingly. Even the budget process, we're watching that very closely because right now there's very minimal and rightfully so conversation that's happening. So again, we'll see what happens with the legislature when they return next week as we move forward. And we're having minimal conversation publicly about the budget because we don't want to send a message that we're being insensitive at the times when people are significantly concerned about the health aspect of it as well. And we want to also keep our focus as a system on the provision of educational opportunities for kids. And again, if you read through the document and the planning document and the video, which I must admit wasn't my best because my eyes look like someone who hasn't slept in about 24 hours, which is about the case. But I think the message is clear to our community in terms of what's our priority focus. And our priority focus is to try to maintain a quality educational experience for our students. So I want to say thanks for the board, for one, for giving us if you want to say the leeway to act without having a lot of speed bumps to jump over and act in a way that we can be comprehensive in our actions. And I think that has allowed us to get and stay ahead of the curve as much as you can. When you think about the curve is largely undefined and very fluid. So I want to say thanks to the board for that. And so more to come in the coming days because this whole virus thing has a significant impact on many things. As businesses close, what's the potential economic impact? As people lose positions or forced to have compromised payroll, what's the impact on those kind of things? So what's the mindset, the mentality? So as a community, we're trying to remain positive. We're trying to inform people of the good things that's happening, give people a reason to be optimistic, or a reason to know that we will transform this challenge into an opportunity. So those are the kind of things that we're trying to do moving forward.
Dr. Robinson, sorry, I just have a question if you don't mind. It's in reference to, I know that we're doing the online learning, which is, I think, phenomenal, that in a short period of time that the district, with the dedication of our administration and our teachers and staff are able to get that all together. My question is for some of our students that rely on our mental health services, through, the Saratoga family, will they be doing some tele-counseling to our students or any way of reaching out and calling our students that need that additional support, especially with all this uncertainty? I know that students, being a parent of a child with extreme anxiety disorder, although he graduated from Shen, but no longer there, but I can understand where that additional support may be needed, for some of our students in addition to the online learning.
So great question, Mrs. Rajat. We spoke about that quite a bit, and even in our planning document, We talk about the roles of our RSPs, our related service providers, not only the ones that we hire, but also the ones we contract with. Mrs. Carmen is in coordination with Saratoga Center, and the piece that everyone is trying to figure out is what's the remote capacity and how effectively we do so. So the expectation is still for people to communicate, be in contact with students as we move forward. So clearly there would be a different model than a sit down visit. But certainly the expectation is to try to provide support as much as is feasible and practicable from remote access. But yes, that's definitely on our radar screen. And not only for kids we have identified in the past, but for kids and families that this new situation could potentially create more anxieties for. And so we want to do that, and we'll be getting into the mode of sending out information. You know, for instance, we send out information. How do you talk to your child about this? And so as we get more of those kind of information points, we'll be sharing information with families to give them some resources to better support their children as well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Again, I'm open to questions, Mr. Presley, if there are questions people have. But the only item that we had on the docket for tonight, so to speak, was in fact the budget presentation and the bus presentation. But clearly we don't have a lot of opportunity to speak. But so if there are things that board members want to talk about, if hopefully the presentations that you have seen over the last several days give you some sense of what we're trying to do, and the commitment of many people to do it and do it well. And these things will evolve. What we're doing this week will be different next week. And we hope that each time it's getting better because there's no template for what we're doing. There's no game plan. We're creating a blueprint as we speak. And what you saw went out to the public today was a lot of mental energy, a lot of thought that went into trying to address in a Q&A format what we call the most salient questions that anyone in the organization and most people outside of the organization will be interested in or have. And so I'm sure there'll be other questions that people have as we move forward. One piece I just want to address, because it's a question that you may encounter as board members. You know, when we send out notices about, and we had several board members ask the same question, you know, what information can we give? Everyone wants to know who's the person and this and this. The HIPAA and all those laws, privacy laws, are still on the books, and we still have the obligation to do so. Secondly, what we state to in our newsletter or whatever, that verbiage, if you will, is verbiage that comes from the Department of Health, who is the authorizing agent that does the screening, and it's their process. And so sometimes people criticize us by saying, well, no one called me about it, and I know my child, or I know I was potentially exposed. What we do, they ask for a lot of information. We provide the Department of Health information, and it's their process in terms of identify who they should call, who they should contact, and otherwise. And so it becomes sometimes a challenging one because people want us to give them more information than one, that we are legally allowed to give, and two, that we even have to give.
Dr. Robinson, it's Deanna. Can you also comment on the different, like when another school district posts something, you know, we're only seeing one side of the story. Can you comment on that, the different details that happens between counties? And, you know, you kind of started to talk about it at the last meeting where we have, I know we've evolved 100 times exponentially since then, but we're in the middle, politics on one side, DOH on the other. So can you kind of comment on, you know, we are where we are at. These cases are, I mean, it's not going to be the last ones we hear of because we started testing. I mean, that is what it is. But I'm just looking for you to comment on, you know, when Niskayuna posts something or Bethlehem posts something, can you kind of put that in perspective for us, please?
No, great question, Mrs. Stevenson. One of the things that right now we notice, and I have the benefit of being in a BOCES that made up of members from 4 different counties. So we have people from Schoharie County, we have Schenectady County, we have Albany County, and I represent Saratoga County. And when we have conversations, it's in the beginning it was pretty alarming, the variations between the interface with school districts and counties, variation between messages that's coming from different county health departments. I think a lot of that came out because of the fact that the edict came from the state level that says counties need to manage this process. And just like school districts have different capacity, different interpretations, I think people were approaching things differently. I think now we're starting to see more commonalities in the type of statements and the type of approach. We've had situations where a school district has had a case and the county directive is, okay, the governor says 24-hour shutdown. That's all you need to do, 24-hour shutdown. You don't need to do anything else. Clearly, you have county says, well, not only are you doing 24-hour shutdown, you're going to be doing a 14-day shutdown because that was kind of the quote unquote quarantine period. So in the beginning, and the beginning hasn't been that long, in the past several days, there are a lot of differences in messaging, and it's not a good versus bad at all. It's the fact that I think people were unpacking the information as we spoke, and I think we'll see moving forward much more consistency because we superintendents in the Capital Region, BOCES, have been demanding more consistency across the counties because we know, for instance, a person who works at Shen may live someplace else. And if they're hearing something else from their local school district, then they're hearing from us, they'll start making the assumption that either someone's lying or someone's covering up information, when the reality of it is the information we get in is just simply different in terms of the direction. So I think that as this evolves, you'll see much more commonality in information sharing. But the one commonality that exists for all of us is to ensure that we're not violating people's privacy under the law. So, but how people couch things, if you will, may vary somewhat. And I think some of that came from what I just described before.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, I don't see any. Dr. Robinson, are you ready to simply transition to maybe some public comments from board members?
Sure. I mean, anything they have, if they haven't asked already, I'd be more than happy to address any other additional questions.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to make some comments and then we'll just go to other board members. But I just want to say that, and I want to use some of your language. And when you communicate to people, you often talk about the who, what, the how, and what's the why. And that's a common question you use to get people grounded. 2 or 3 weeks ago, there were very firm what's, who's, when's, why's, and how's. And somewhere along the way, all those broke up. All those got chopped up. And you and the district had to figure out, what do we do next as these things are unfolding both in the news and social media and what you're hearing from official channels. And I think you've done a great job of getting us ready and positioned to continue instruction, to continue to advocate for strong schools. And I think we're in very good shape. I cannot think of anything that has not been handled improperly here. We're using protocols for privacy. We're using the correct language. We're telling students that and teachers and parents, this is not an ending of school. It's just a transition to online education. So thanks very much. Please pass on my personal commendation that this is being done right and that we hope to see it continue as we transition to this new unknown. But I think we're in much better shape than we were 2 weeks ago. At our last meeting, you promised a package to us on a Friday. We got it on a Thursday. It was much detailed than we thought. You're allowing us to sit in on some of the meetings with administrators to help ground us on what the next steps are. Those are very important to help us to continue to convey the message to the community. Yes, this is a very challenging time, but we're taking the right actions the right way, at the right pace, not paying short shrift to something that needs more attention. Very good deliberate planning and thinking is going on. So thank you very much. And that's just what I wanted to convey to you. I'll turn it over to any other board member that would like to make other comments. Anybody else?
I just want to add that I agree we're in unusual times. This is, we're in uncharted waters, and it takes a lot of courage to lead in times like this. I do believe many more questions are going to come in, especially in the immediate coming days as things continue to progress. I think it's most important to keep communication open to get the information out there because people are starving for information. And the more, I don't think it will create panic. I think they just need to know affect them and what they can do. There are many that are looking to help, obviously in ways that it's not going to make the situation worse. We know that we're not supposed to be out there mingling, but I think you understand my point. Thank you for this, and thank you for also quickly changing tonight's agenda to something where we're not at risk at all being in a room together. I know that we also had to move the board retreat. I think that was a good call as well. So thank you all. And this is why we're here. And use us. I mean, we're here for you as well.
Then I appreciate both comments and the sentiment and the support. And I always want to say that, it's a synergy of our efforts that makes us great as a system. And we have a lot of people who respond to my emails at 3 o'clock in the morning when they hear the ding when they're sleeping, and know that if I'm sending something, it must be something worthwhile, even though I probably shouldn't be doing it and getting more sleep. But I'll deal with that in the next chapter of life, so to speak. So we'll deal with it. Just one technical piece. Just want to point out, the documents should now be available to the board. It appears like it's one link, but it's actually two separate pieces. So I think if you kind of click on a budget word, you'll get the budget one. And if you click on the bus word, you'll get the bus one. So if that doesn't work, just send me an email. In fact, I might just out of precaution, just email it out to you anyway, but that should work at that point.
Dr. Robinson, oftentimes I'm not very stingy when it comes to my criticism of the governor and some of his positions on education. But in this particular instance, his firm leadership has really been exemplary. Last night I was at the BOCES board meeting, and Anita, our DS, said that his stepping forward helped the BOCES and all of the component districts because, as you mentioned, they're in 4 different counties, and some of the differences didn't originate with the school districts, but rather due to the fact that they have to work with 4 different county health officials, and they didn't necessarily all come from exactly the same place either. So by the governor taking charge and giving directive, it made it much easier on all of 24 component school districts to pull together with a common policy. And the one other thing I would like to say, assuming we have some level of audience, is that I certainly urge people to follow the mitigating practices. The goal at this time, well, first let me say, we will ultimately have a lot of people getting sick. The goal at this point in time is to actually spread it out rather than having it peak early on, so that the number of people who become seriously ill do not overwhelm the facilities available. If we can stretch that out, and that much of that has to do with following the mitigating processes, we'll all be a lot better off. That's it for me.
Great points, Gary. Great points. Great points. And that's why the closing is to enforce social distancing and some of the things that you can't dictate by regulation. So hopefully this lend to even just good habits, good hygiene habits moving forward, or should I say better hygiene habits moving forward. So again, Mr. Presser, thank you for the opportunity to go even beyond the budget comments, because I think it's important for us to be on the same page in our thoughts and our communications. So when we encounter people in the public, however that might be remotely or otherwise, that there's a common message. And the common message is that, we'll fight through and get through and be better because of the experience, be it because of lessons learned or because we just become, quite frank with you, our fortitude increase as a result of contending with the challenge. And so that's our goal as we move forward. And if there's questions that board members may have, please feel free to send me an email, and I promise I won't send it to you at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Thanks, Oliver. You need to go home and get some sleep.
Thank you. So I'm waiting for the board president to call the meeting to order to close it out.
Yeah,
But if you
okay.
have to
We're going
send-
to try this using chat because I think that this might be more efficient. So please go to your chat. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Please send motion 1 and motion 2.
So move.
Waiting for a
So
second.
moved.
Okay, so
Sure.
second motion, all in favor, please say aye on chat. Some of you I can see a picture, some of you I can't. Just say aye.
Yep.
Aye.
So we get a lot of yeses on that. All yeses.
Okay. Oh, I think motion's carried. Meeting adjourned.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Take care, Doctor.
Thank you. Good night and get some sleep.
Will do. Thank you.